Great to have you with us. Again, my name is Jeff Thomas. I'm the CEO of Untitled Wealth Partners. We've got a special treat for you today. I'm just going to do the intro and kind of explain why we're doing this, and then introduce our speaker today, who's Cale Dowell, the COO of Untitled Wealth Partners, to share kind of one of his brainchildren on how we interact with couples around trying to help them improve their marital communication around money. So once again, welcome. Just to kind of frame why we're doing this, we view ourselves as part of a Christian, mission-driven community of advisors looking to implement biblical wisdom into our practice and into the wisdom and advice we give to clients. We don't hang the cross in the front door, but we kind of call it the Chick-fil-A of wealth management. We are unapologetic about where our principles and values, mission and vision come from. We know many of you are part of Kingdom Advisors. We are members and sponsors of Kingdom Advisors ourselves. They've been very helpful in me over my walk over the last 15 years. And so this really is kind of one of our ways to just give back to the community. We feel like all of the wisdom, if any, that we've accumulated at our firm is really coming from God above anyway. So we're trying to hold it loosely and share it with the community, and we hope you're blessed by it. We're going to try to do one of these webinars once a month, about on average. We did one a month ago that was very well received on kind of marketing and how do you build your practice in a God-honoring way. Today, we're going to talk about wealth languages, and I'll let Cale kind of explain what that is, but just a little bit of history, maybe about the firm, just so you know. You can put us in the little box, if you will. Our team spent about 25 years at the wirehouses, Payne Weber, which has become UBS, for 8 years, and then 17 years at Morgan Stanley. While we were at Morgan Stanley, we started the Christian Focus group there. Many of you, maybe a few of you, are members of that group. And I used to host a monthly conference call there, kind of similar to this. But now we can kind of bring it to a broader audience. We felt God leading us to start Archetype, which is an RIA-only firm based in Houston, but our aspirations to have offices everywhere. And so that's kind of where we are. And I just thought I'd share quickly what our vision and mission are, and then we'll kick it to Cale to share today. Our vision is to build, Archetype means ideal model. Our vision is to build the ideal God-honoring wealth management company. And our mission is to connect our clients' money with their purpose and thereby help their families thrive across generations. So thank you for joining us. We just kind of view ourselves as one beggar showing another beggar where they got some bread. And so with that, let me turn it over to Cale Dowell. Cale, thanks for being with us today.
Glad to be here. Always looking forward to this, just to get to share any wisdom that's been beneficial to us or the clients we have the privilege of serving. If we can share that with the community, that might benefit another person that's having a conversation with a client, go a little bit deeper, build a little bit stronger relationship, uncover, a truth in their life that might lead to impact either, in that moment or down the road. That's the juice, as we talk about around here. So excited to walk through wealth languages today. And I was chatting with someone the other day. It's kind of been really exciting to me, anyways. Why and how people are, I guess, latching onto this and really enjoying it. I never thought much of it when I kind of came up with the concept, but it's just been, I think, a really cool, unique kind of God moment of him using something that really he inspired and leveraging it to impact more people. So with that being said, we'll get kicked off here.
Hey, Cale, if I can interrupt you just 1 second, I forgot to tell everybody to feel free to use the chat box, right?
That's right.
Myself and we've got another associate of ours at the company, Leslie, sort of monitoring the chat box. So if you have questions, I may just jump in and interrupt Cale. He knows that could happen with your question. Or we may accumulate them and answer them toward the end, but feel free to shoot your questions or comments into the chat box. So thanks for letting me interrupt the first time here.
No problem. And I think that probably is a good example of hopefully what will happen through the course of this presentation. We want it to be more of a dialogue, less of a lecture, if you will. And so feel free, as Jeff alluded to, if you've got questions, use that chat box, and we'll try to answer it along the way, and certainly we'll carve out some time at the end. So with that being said, let's dive into wealth languages. So one of the things that really, I think, drives our company, but certainly one of the questions that drives me when you think about wealth management is largely what we do is predicated on mitigating risk, whether it's through investments, financial planning, helping someone design an estate plan, whatever. A large part of our job is focused on navigating the financial risk of life. And so that question was always an interesting one to me as it pertained to the access that we have as advisors, because it begs the question, what is the biggest risk? And so there's a couple of statistics you might have heard of, you might not have heard of, but I'll briefly walk through them on what is interestingly the biggest risk to wealth. The first is a study that was done of about 3,500 high net worth families, actually ultra high net worth families, that concluded about 9 out of 10 of these wealthy families lose their net worth by the third generation. So it kind of, that's an interesting, sobering statistic, but it begs the question, why? Because I don't really read much into that unless I have more details personally. But fortunately, a follow-up study was done to uncover that thing and the why, if you will. And that's what you're seeing on the screen now, which is essentially 3% of the risk to wealth across those generations was due to like bad legal, bad tax, bad investment advice. But the other 97% was largely due to some form of a breakdown of communication. Of course, 60% specifically that, but I would argue inadequately prepared heirs, failure to establish family mission, that kind of connects back in my mind to communication of some kind. And it's not surprising, we have issues when it pertains to communicating in money. If you're anything like me, just having a conversation about a budget, even though we're in the industry of wealth management with my wife, can be challenging if I'm not careful. So, certainly when early days when we were married. But talking about money is kind of this taboo topic. There's not a lot of places to talk about it. And so not surprisingly, there's statistics you probably are more familiar with, right? What's the number one problem as it pertains to stress and conflict in marriage? Well, it's communication about money. There was a study done that concluded that's the number one source of stress and conflict in marriage. It's the number 2 cause of divorce. This isn't probably news to you, but the only thing that's higher cause of divorce than communication about finances, not surprisingly, is infidelity. So the last kind of piece of this is there was another study done by American Express back in 2010 that found 9 out of 10 couples reported actively avoiding talking about finances. So when something's doesn't take a PhD to conclude when something's not being talked about, that can create problems. That's going to create, it's like a wound that never heals. It's just, rotting there, and that can over time lead to really bad things. And so when this topic of money doesn't get communicated about, it can cause all sorts of problems. And so the statistics are just pointing to that. And fortunately, there is hope. Dave Ramsey did a study with his huge Dave Ramsey network and concluded that out of the people that reported having a great marriage, 94% of them reported that they were in a normal, regular occurrence communicating about their finances. So to kind of make that really simple, people that communicate well about money in relationship have better marriages. Simplistically, that's what Dave Ramsey's research showed. And one of the things that led me to develop the wealth languages, and I'll talk about this in a minute, was if anyone's familiar with the love languages, it's essentially just a book written by Dr. Gary Chapman. We've got a little quote from him on the screen, but the love languages were really impactful when I was a long time ago getting married, to just better understand the way I give and receive love and vice versa for my wife. And so as I kind of alluded to with these statistics, of course, the big one being what's the number one risk to wealth, how money is a struggle in relationships. it begged the question, you know, we saw it play out in front of us. If you've ever sat down with a couple doing a financial plan, going through their budget, et cetera, I often saw this play out as the third party in the room going, man, two people are saying relatively the same thing, and yet communication's not happening, right? So I could see it as a third party, but it made me think, well, this is probably happening in my own marriage, right? At times where I'm feeling like, how can this person not understand me? And yet they're probably thinking the same thing. So as a third party in the room, you're able to kind of see a different picture develop. And so it led me to back to that kind of love language component that Dr. Gary Chapman wrote, going, well, gosh, if there's ways that we communicate about love, these kind of intrinsic motivators, then perhaps that also pertains to how we communicate about money or about wealth. And that kind of led me on this journey through research of, you know, conversations with clients, meeting with some family therapists, psychologists, et cetera, to develop kind of a framework of how and why we communicate about money and ultimately what that might impact. And so that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. And I'm excited to share with you what we've learned. So the first thing I'm going to ask is just a simple question. And I want everyone to just take a minute and think about these questions that I'm about to ask you. And the first one is this. If you had an extra 50 grand to spend, or insert some meaningful sum of money, the dollar amount is relevant only in the sense that it's meaningful to you. So $500, $500 million, I don't care. If you had an extra meaningful sum of money to spend, what would you spend it on? Where would you spend it and why? And the caveat here is you can't give it away. So you have to spend it on something. So everyone just take a second and think about, maybe write it down, where you would spend that money and why. All right. If you're still thinking, feel free to do so. But the next question that I'm going to ask is very similar. And by the way, these are questions we utilize with clients. And I'm going to tie this into how it pertains to us as advisors here in just a minute. But the second question is similar, and it's simply this. If you had an extra 50 grand to spend, where do you think your spouse would spend it and why? An extra 50 grand or meaningful sum of money, where would your spouse spend it and why? Take a second, think about it, jot it down.
My guess, Cale, while they're thinking, one thing I think you said, I don't know if I caught it this time, is you can't give it away. We got a bunch of generous people on this call. So the one thing you can't do is give it away, right? So you gotta, could invest it, right? You can spend it on a trip, you can buy a car, you know, whatever, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. But maybe fix the leaky roof, you know, pay for kids' private school. Yeah. Buy a new car, go on a trip, invest it. You know, your buddy's been talking to you for years about, oh, I'm doing this startup. It could be anything. I mean, anything under the sun. You just can't give it away. Where would you spend it?
So we're just trying to show them, we're kind of taking you through the exercise that you can take clients through, right? That's so you sort of experience it first. We'll kind of share our stories a little too.
That's right. Okay, so the beauty of this is I'm guessing if you answered both these questions, for the vast majority of you, these two answers are different. And it certainly was with my wife and I. And I'll explain specifically what that looked like in just a minute. But the reason I wanted you to kind of go through this exercise and see how it's a useful question we ask with clients as well is because when you highlight those differences, it enables opportunities to have conversations about why those differences exist. And that's the fundamental piece of communication that needs to be solved. Before you can talk about a budget or why we want to spend dollars here or where we want to spend dollars, I should say, it's really the why behind it. And so when you kind of look at the mirror, so to speak, of where you would spend money, where you think your spouse would spend money, then you have that conversation. A lot of times what we'll do is you'll write down on a piece of paper what where you think your spouse would send it, they would do the same thing, and then you switch. And sometimes it's the same, sometimes it's revealing. You pegged them wrong. But it always provokes a meaningful conversation about money. And I'm going to talk about just a minute specifically how it relates to what we call kind of the wealth language that might pertain to your personality. So that's what we're going to go to next. Essentially there's 4 wealth languages, and kind of going back to what I was alluding to earlier of having conversations with clients, talking about their financial plan, et cetera, being that third party in the room, kind of seeing the breakdown of communication happen, and then doing that big research study, talking with clients, talking with family therapists, psychologists, et cetera, and concluding, trying to make it really simple, that there's really 4 primary wealth languages. And I want to highlight the simplicity too of this. One of the big things for me, this is just personal preference, so take it with a grain of salt, is there's a lot of cool, useful tools out there for a variety of things in our industry, but some of them are just really onerous, right? And specifically for the client. It takes a lot of effort. They got to fill out, 17 pages or whatever the case might be. And what we've learned is how we can create things to be simple, more convenient. It might seem simple, but the complexity that goes into it is actually large. And so it took a long time for us to boil this down into a really simple format. But the thing I love about it, and the thing why this is impactful in conversations with clients, is my hope is after this webinar, you could go home and have this exact same conversation with your spouse or with a client tomorrow, that it's that simple. You don't have to have some 200-page test, but it's a really easy, convenient, simplistic framework to just enhance conversations with clients about how they communicate with money. So that's going to lead us to the 4 primary wealth languages, and that's what you're seeing on the screen now. So simplistically, we've got 2 axes, right? We've got on one side low risk to high risk, and then on the bottom we've got near term or near time, if you will, short time to long term or further out in the future. And that's kind of how this quadrant, if you will, is laid out. Is what's your capacity, your willingness, your feeling around risk, and then what's your feeling around taking care of the here and now versus thinking about the future. And so there's 4 wealth languages that you're seeing on the screen: stability, future, opportunity, and moment. And we're going to talk a little bit about each one. I'm going to give a little story as well to maybe give you some context. But before we dive into that, I want you to go back to what you wrote down on the paper about where you think you would spend that meaningful sum of money. And I just want you to consider for a moment, as we go through this exercise, where that dollar amount would fit inside of one of these quadrants. So just be thinking about that as we talk about the explanation of each one. Okay, so the first one we're going to hit is stability. And for each one of these, I got my little memes. So here we got, from one of our favorite movies, I've got bills, they're multiplying, right? So the stability person, and really for anybody, was something a little caveat I should have here. Like a lot of, personality tests or whatever out there, there's extremes on either end within each one of these primary wealth languages, right? So there's good and bad associated with each one. And of course, there's people that are healthy stability people and people that are really unhealthy stability people. And for simplistic, explanation of the unhealthy stability person, this is the person that's so scared about everything, they're just hiding money under their mattress, right? Like legitimately hiding it under their mattress. We had a conversation one time with a prospect that was so terrified of potential changes in the government. They had everything in cash because they were worried that the government was going to change and somehow take all their money. And I don't want to say it wasn't a valid concern for that person. Certainly it was very real, but I would say the activity, what it led them to was unhealthy. So stability in a nutshell are people that are focused, again, going back to our X and Y axis, both the here and now, and they don't love risk. They would prefer to be things that are known and not risky. And so my wife, to kind of pick on her here, and I'll pick on myself later, she falls in this stability category. And there's a lot of reasons why she does, and we'll highlight that in a minute. But suffice to say, she likes to take care of the here and now. She wants to make sure the bills are paid. She wants to make sure the house is in good working order. It's put together. It looks nice. The kids have good clothes when they go to school. Their tuition's paid for. All of those sorts of things are always at the top of her mind. So if she had an extra meaningful sum of money, it's going towards those things. Occasionally, if on a whim, if that bucket's full, and I'll talk about this again in a little bit, she might move to one of these other quadrants, but that's her primary. That's where she lives. That's where she kind of embodies. Now, of course, I think the stability people tend to be easy to pick on because, oh, they don't, particularly in the Christian world, right? They're not relying on God. They're too anxious. They need to give their worries over or whatever. And while that's all valid, let me just highlight a couple of really positive things that stability people do for us. They're phenomenal nurturers. They're phenomenal homemakers. They're phenomenal at making sure everyone in their circuit is taken care of with the here and now. They're the people that when you're around them, you just feel like you're at home. They've baked cookies. They've thought of everything. They make you feel like you are in a place that you can unwind and relax. A healthy stability person falls in that category. And by the way, that's a good thing to spend money on. I think we would all agree. And the purpose of these wealth languages, as we walk through them, is really for us to develop, first, understand who we are and who someone else is, and develop empathy for how we might understand one another just a little bit more. So stability in a nutshell, using my wife, right? They're focused on the here and now. They're not great. They don't love risk. They want to take care of the categories that fall more in the security side of the financial life that they live. So that being said, Jeff, any comments on this as it pertains to the stability bucket? Any insight from your perspective?
No, I just think it's really interesting about how people's history come into this. So, I think it was at a Kingdom Advisor conference that I heard this one time where they were talking about asking the first memory people have of money. And, I remember the first time I heard that question asked, somebody talked about how the image that this person, the client answered was, when they close their eyes, they think about their first memory of money. It was him sitting on his couch with his siblings, but the couch was in the front yard because they'd been evicted from their home. And there was a neighbor's car moving slowly past the front of their house before they had gotten evicted, while the couch is on the front lawn, pointing and laughing at them. And wow, what context. So you can imagine that this client would be mostly worried about stability. Yeah. I'm not going to put my family through that level of instability. So I think this begs a narrative, right? You get the story and ask that question, you can kind of help guide them into this. But actually, we found that folks are pretty easily figure out which one is primary. And we'll get into this later. We know that there is not, you just don't have one, you have multiples. We'll get into that later. But I think just understanding the narrative, you can kind of help them unpack that, and you learn a lot about the client without having us just run through a list of questions.
No, thank you, Jeff. I'll just add in there too, right? Like that's one of the beauties of this from an advisor perspective is, and so that's a question that we asked. Jeff said is what's the first memory of money? Because my favorite part about this exercise is like when you are able to. When I'm sitting down with a couple that's been married for 45 years, and I have these conversations. And they get to a place where they're you ask them a question like that, what's your first memory of money or something? And all of a sudden the story comes out and the husband or the wife looks at the other person and goes, I never knew that before, right? Like, that's the juice. And then you got to be there and witness that, like that you go home feeling like I had a great day. But take it one step further in terms of like impact on the bottom line of your business, the stickiness that creates from a relational capital you're building with your client and the moments that you were there for. When you're there for those aha moments, or where they're having a connection as a husband and spouse around these little empathetic little extra things that they're gaining for one another, it's a big deal. So the narrative that this draws out, I always say that the best part of the wealth languages isn't, hopefully everyone loves my little quadrant and whatever. I think it's a useful tool, but I think the best part about this is the narrative this framework draws out in conversation with clients. That's where the magic really happens. So let's move forward. We'll go to the next wealth language. We're just moving over to the right side of that quadrant on the future. So again, still low risk, but further out in the future. And I've got my little buddy here sitting back, hands behind his head, starts contributing to 401k at a young age for early retirement, smartest guy in the womb. And we probably all know these people. A lot of, not to stereotype, but probably a lot of engineers, accountants, etc., fall in the future category. They're checklist people. They like things to be predictable. They like to know that if they do X, Y will happen down the road. So they're thinking more about the future. They're thinking about, of course, their 401k. Well, of course, I've got to max that out because if I want to retire with X amount of money, I need to start doing it at this age. I've already run the math. And so that's going to be a priority on their budget list, if you will. They're going to be focused on, well, we got to pay for the kids' college, and we got to start it the second that they come out of the womb. So we got to start that 529 like now. They're always thinking ahead about the future. And I'll tell a story on one of my best friends, actually godparents to my kids. And I always use the story of, we grew up together back in the day playing Legos, right? And I was always the person, and this will lead to my personal wealth language here in a minute, but I was always the person, like I'd see all the Legos and I'd just get some weird idea and I'd try to build a spaceship, but it was, let's just say it didn't look like a spaceship. It was my interpretation of whatever weird thing was going on in my head. Whereas my best friend, Paul, he would have like the 5,000 piece pirate ship set, and meticulously, right? Like he had a plan. He would follow the instructions to a letter, and next thing you know, here's my crummy looking spaceship over. It's not even a spaceship. It's just a bunch of amalgamation of Legos. And then here is his perfectly put together, pristine, amazing Lego pirate ship. And I think that's a really great example, although it has nothing to do with money, of someone that is way more focused on the end result and a predictable path to get there. And that's where future people fall as it pertains to their finances. What's my predictable path for the future? How do I check those boxes? And so just these two wealth languages that we've highlighted thus far, you can kind of see, well, gosh, if my wife is a stability and she's focused on the here and now and wants to make sure the bills are paid, the this, the that, that's going to be her highest priority. But if I'm a future person, I'm focused on further out in the future. Well, that's my biggest priority. So if we're talking about a budget, we're not wrong per se, but we're talking about it from two different angles, and that can create friction. So that's future-oriented people in a nutshell.
Hey, Cale, if I can interrupt, maybe I'm projecting here, but I'm going to guess with a bunch of financial advisors on this webinar that we have a lot of people going, yep, that would be my primary one.
I wasn't going to say anything.
I'll throw myself under the bus as a recovering accountant who became a financial advisor. That's definitely me. And we'll get to these other ones. It's kind of fun when you start. The thing I get so excited about is just like the love languages. When my wife and I went through that, it gave us vocabulary to, things that would frustrate us about each other. Suddenly you'd have this understanding, kind of like a personality profile, like you talked about earlier. It's like, it just gives you language to understand how the other person thinks and kind of normalizes it, right? So instead of me getting mad at my wife for always wanting to spend money on something, well, maybe she has we'll get to hers in a moment. But instead of being frustrated with it, we have this language that normalizes the other person's behavior so we understand it better. Oh, that's just because you're there. So that's so much fun when we get into this with couples, because they really start laughing about it. Things that they would argue about before, they start chuckling about. I think that's beautiful.
That's a good point, Jeff, and thanks for that insight there. And so given your little quip, we'll move on to we're going to move to moment. So this is fitting considering Dolly's personal wealth language. And I love the meme I have here, by the way. This little girl is take the money and run. And moment people, similar to stability people, tend to get a bad rap, and probably appropriately so, because the extremes out there, we all know them, right? It's the person that, they got their first job and they bought a boat, right? That's just an acronym for break out another 1,000. But moment people are focused on the here and now, but they're way more willing to take risk. And so of course there's those out there that anytime they get, anything, they're just chasing the shiny nickel. They want the best thing. They, buying the car when they can't afford it. They're living in the moment. They're very much less concerned, generally speaking, about the dollars and cents. They're much more concerned about maximizing the moment. But there's a lot of amazing moment people. And by the way, you know them, and they're people you want to hang around, because amazing moment people are all about creating meaningful experiences for themselves and the people that they care about and love. And I'll give you an example. And you might have had this fight before in your own marriage, particularly if your wife is a moment person, is, you get a little windfall of some kind, and it's like, oh, hey, let's this is great. Let's take the kids to Disney World. And you're going, no, like that's not in the plan. We need to apply this to the 401k, whatever, you know, the 529, et cetera. And what the moment person's doing in that moment is saying, this is an opportunity for us to have a meaningful, create a memory as a family. And that's a priority for them as it pertains to their finances. How do we maximize and utilize our money to create memories that we'll have forever? And even when we're gone, it's just the kids, they'll have those memories too. That's a good thing to spend money on. Now, of course, it can come out to play in bad ways, but they're the people that force us to really maximize and take care of ourselves and recognize that tomorrow's not promised and money is just a tool. They are inherently wired, and they think way more than the average any other quadrant about all this could be gone tomorrow, and money is really just a tool to maximize experiences, the moment, et cetera. It doesn't mean they won't think about the other things. As Jeff alluded to, we have each of these, but that's where they tend to go in a point in time. That's kind of their gut reaction.
Cale, can I interrupt you just for a second, just to add on to that? I think you alluded to something. Well, first of all, just kind of go around because I sort of tease this, but my wife, if I had to write down the number one, like we'll get to where maybe you write down your number one and number two, and you can rank all four, really, right? But like for her, number one is moment. If she has a chance to plan a trip or a party, that's what she's all about. Moment for me is the last thing on my list. Okay. So sometimes when she wants to do that frustrates me. But actually, even going through this kind of helped me go, you know, that's just part of her personality. And honestly, my life's a lot better by her planning those things. My life would be a lot more boring without those trips and those parties and getting together with family and friends and doing all those things. Actually, right before the webinar, she already said, okay, here's what's happening Friday night and here's what's happening Saturday night, right? I mean, I would do nothing if it wasn't for her. So those are, and then I think you also alluded to this, and which is these can become components of the financial plan, right? So rather than when you're in these meetings and, you know, you have those tense moments sometimes where, especially if you've had these clients for a long time and they're really comfortable around you as an advisor, they'll literally argue at the table with you there. And this can be such a great tool. We've drawn it on napkins, you know, just these four quadrants, and it sort of breaks the ice. And then suddenly you can put these goals, right? Hey, let's put a budget for parties and trips, you know, in the budget, in the financial plan. Hey, okay, let's max out the 401k. If there's not enough money to do both, how do we compromise, right? So I think, do you want to say one word about how maybe that helps the planning process?
Yes, you beat me to the punch. I actually have a slide for that, but yeah, it absolutely 100% helps the financial planning process because it just provides language for how are you going to fill these buckets, particularly the ones that are primary. So as Jeff alluded to, right, like we'll get to this, but like you'll kind of rank your wealth languages, but my wife and I have completely opposite wealth languages. It could not be more opposite in terms of what's primary. But where we find a lot of cohesion is our second highest wealth languages, if we rank them, is both moment. So that helps us find common ground. Okay, how do I fill up her how does she fill up my bucket? How do I fill up her stability bucket? If those are full, now we've got capacity to focus on other things that we both care about, and that one for us is moment. So an inordinate amount of our personal budget goes to experiences, trips, et cetera. Matter of fact, we're taking a trip this weekend. So headed to Austin tomorrow, to the Omni Barton Creek. That'll be fun. So anyways, it's a great mechanism. It just provides, to Jeff's point, a common language, an easy, understandable, simplistic. There's not a lot of financial jargon here. It's just a simple way to talk. Okay, how are we going to fill up this bucket or that bucket? Where do these goals fall? How are we going to allocate money? Okay, you're talking about the budget over here. I'm talking about the budget over here. How do we come together? And how can I have empathy for where it is that you're coming from? So that leads to the final wealth language.
And I think your favorite.
It is my favorite because it's where I fall. My wife helped me pick out this little meme because she said, this is how I feel. I'm Buzz Lightyear here going, opportunity everywhere. And my wife looks like Woody, terrified as all get out. And again, I alluded to this just a second ago. My wife being a stability person, I'm an opportunity person. And again, looking at our quadrant, so she's low risk, short period of time, near term. I'm high risk, long term, farther out in the future. And it's just, as you can imagine, that can create an enormous amount of opportunity for conflict, for friction, et cetera. And we certainly had some of that early days in our marriage, because I could not understand where she was coming from. She could not understand where I was coming from, even though we were both saying things that were true as it pertained to the way we should look about our finances. But we had to figure out how that was going to work for us together. And even since we've had this, it's been definitely an upgrade, because we can understand one another just with some common language. We get to that intrinsic motivator, as a lot of psychologists have told me. What's the intrinsic motivation behind that desire? And another way they say it sometimes is that aha moment that goes on in people's brains, where the word's almost irrelevant, but now it's a language where it links back to something, a feeling that you have. And that's what we're trying to get at with these wealth languages. And so of course, I can pick on myself for this one, but I'll also tell a story that I think is pertinent, because it kind of showcases the differences. So I mentioned one of my best friends of all time is a future person. He falls in that future quadrant. His younger brother falls in the opportunity quadrant. And this is a kid in high school, had some scheme he was running on eBay, like selling like promoted accounts or something, like in the early days of eBay. And he was making $500 here, $600 there, which for a high school kid is a lot of money. And currently this kid is working on building nodes for like cryptocurrency exchanges. I mean, the guy is always thinking about opportunity. So much more opportunistic, and certainly in the way he views risk, much more willing to take risk, thinking further out in the future, the moment, the future, the stability, less important. And so opportunity people, a lot of them tend to be, of course, entrepreneurs, real estate people. Not that all are. I've met housewives that are opportunistic in the way that they think about money. But where this can come out in a bad way, of course, is the person that gets swindled by every, shiny, oh, look at this penny stock, for sure, you got to do it, quick. So it can come out in a lot of bad ways, but great opportunity people tend to have people around them. They know their risks, and they tend to have people around them that will counsel them to pick the right opportunities, not just chase every opportunity.
Cale, I ran into it just as an illustration. Sorry to interrupt. Just as an illustration, I remember meeting a guy at a men's ministry kind of luncheon deal one time, and we were just chatting before the program started, and he found out that that we were in the wealth advisory business, and he said, well, and he was about 75 years old. He goes, well, I just went back to work because I have to. And I said, oh man, well, why is that? And he said, well, he went to all these sort of angel investor presentations, sort of like Shark Tank before there was Shark Tank in Houston, and he invested in 18 startups with all of his savings, okay? And they all went to zero, okay? They all went to zero. He thought, well, I mean, if 3 of them hit a home run, I'll be fine, maybe I'll make $1 gazillion, but they all were way too risky. They were all opportunity, right? He put nothing in stability, nothing in the diversified future, and he just went all in and lost it all. And so he had to go back to work. So anyway, just an example of sort of the extreme example, right? Where you go too far. So maybe the regulation of our spouse having some other priorities is probably good for us, even if it doesn't feel like that at the time, right?
It's a good word. All right, so the question now becomes, based on kind of walking through the wealth languages from a high level, based on that earlier question of where would you place that, what would you spend that meaningful sum of money on? Take a second, think about, based on what you've heard so far, what do you think your primary wealth language is? The core of who you are. Another question to think about as you're thinking about that is the one Jeff alluded to, is what's your first memory of money? So take a second, think about that. As you're thinking, I'll just tell another story on my wife. For Jeff's point about you learn these stories and this history that kind of gives context to why they are the way they're wired.
We should probably preface this story with "You have permission to deliver."
Yes, yeah. Sorry, I should definitely do that. Thank you. But my wife grew up in her mom was married several times and didn't have a great relationship with her dad early days. That's now been rectified, amazing relationship. But and for different periods of time in her life, they were legitimately homeless, living with neighbors. So that doesn't guarantee, by the way, that she's going to be a stability person. You could also make the argument someone that grows up like that might be a moment person, right? Might just want to, every dollar they get, hey, I never want to do that again, so I'm going to spend it so I have something, fun activity or whatever. But for my wife, it's not a far stretch to kind of hear that story and go, oh, okay, I can see why stability is a hot topic for her, right? She has those memories that she harkens back to, and she's like, I never want to be in that situation again. And that's certainly been the case in our marriage. That's her number one fear. Something will happen and she'll go back to having to, live with a neighbor or something along those lines. So all this communication, the wealth languages are just opening up doors to more narrative about why you're wired the way you're wired and building empathy for one another. So what is your primary wealth language? And then same thing, what do you think your spouse's primary wealth language is based on what you've learned, based on that earlier question of where would you spend that meaningful sum of money? And ultimately where this nets out is this, which is a wealth profile. And Jeff already talked a little bit about this, but rank your wealth languages. So for me, opportunity is number one. And I said this earlier, moment is my second, future is my third, and the last is my wife's first, which is stability. So again, I already mentioned this, but you can imagine where the thing that's most important to my wife, my gut core DNA, it's the least important to me. And so that just in and of itself is a good example of, it's no surprise, you can have conflict around talking about money because it's hard for me to understand her. I'm not wired that way. And vice versa, her least important wealth language is opportunity. So that's where we have to make sure when we talk about our personal financial situation, how do I go above and beyond to fill up her stability bucket? Hopefully she reciprocates for me, but it's my willingness to do that's not predicated on her reciprocation. And if I can fill up her bucket, she can fill up my bucket. Now that gives us access to where we do find cohesion, which is for us, the moment bucket. So what's your wealth profile? And then I would encourage you for your own just personal exercise and enjoyment, go have this conversation with your spouse this evening. Talk about these wealth language, have them identify what their wealth profile is, because that's where the magic happens, is the wealth languages leads to conversations that you might not have otherwise. And it's in a very low risk environment because you're not talking about actual dollars and cents. And that's the kicker here. This will lead to conversations talking about actual dollars and cents. But the reason we found that it's been really impactful in communication with clients is it's a low risk way to talk about these conversations because we're not actually putting dollars and names attached to dollars in the midst of this. We're just trying to understand why we're wired the way that we're wired, and have empathy for how the other person that we care about is wired. So that's the wealth languages in a nutshell, and we'll do some Q&A here in a minute. I've already had some questions come through. But I leave you with this quote, and one more thing is, Henry Ford said it best: coming together is a beginning, staying together is progress, but working together is success. And ultimately, spouses, we've got to work together. And that's where success comes in. And so that's my hope, is that this tool for our clients is just one way to get them to a place where they can work together with more cohesion around their finances. And then specifically for advisors, it's been so impactful just as a resource to pull out. It doesn't take, again, there's not some giant, huge test they have to take. They don't have to understand regression analysis. All they got to do is have a conversation about who they are, why they're wired that way, and how it might impact the way that they think about money, which obviously influences the way they communicate about money. And that's the wealth languages in a nutshell. So the beauty of this, I mentioned earlier, Dave Ramsey's little study that he did about 94% of people that say that they have great marriages report that they talk regularly about money, about their finances. And so congratulations if you're listening, or if you have this conversation with clients, you're marching towards that statistic, which is a good thing. So I've got my little, my wife's favorite Christmas movie is Elf, so I had to throw it in here. Good old Will Ferrell, congratulations, you did it. So that being said, Jeff, anything else to add? Otherwise, we'll answer some questions.
Yeah, let's go ahead and put up the final slide. Do we have our emails, perhaps?
Yes, I was going to do that. I was going to do that after the questions.
Yes, I know some people have to go, so I just wanted to throw it up there. You know, if you guys have any questions, if you need to go, please go. We're gonna address a couple of questions here. I know we promised to keep to an hour. We got 9 minutes left, so. But if you have any questions, just please hit Cale Dowell at Archetype Wealth or Jeff.Thomas at Archetype Wealth. Happy to follow up with you. And I think we're going to send a copy of this recording out, right?
That's right. There will be a copy of the recording. There's also a feedback form. We'd love your input on what you like, what you didn't like, what you changed, so on and so forth. And then we also have a little assessment tool. So as much as I said, there's no need for an assessment tool, we did develop a little something that's just really easy. I think it's like 15 questions to kind of help if you're not 100% sure where you might fall in a wealth language. It's just a little tool to do that. So if you're interested in taking that, feel free to fill that out and we'll respond back with what the results were.
So anyway, if you got to go, thanks for joining us. A couple of questions that we have. One, Cale, is, you know, sort of at what point in the client relationship do you think is ideal to bring this up, to use this tool?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And Jeff, you probably have insight on this too, but I would say I've used it at varying points. I've used it literally in the prospecting side of you know, if I had a really interesting conversation with a prospect husband and wife, because we're really big on meeting with the spouses, you know, sometimes I'll bring it straight to that, and it can be a useful tool for someone to go, wow, these guys are different. But certainly as it pertains to the advising side, a great time to bring this up is when you're doing planning, because it really helps them get on the same page as one another. And that's usually what we say. Hey, we just want to make sure the spouses are on the same page. We'll bring this up as a tool to walk them through. And it tends to be a really healthy, fun, relational building conversation.
You know, thanks, Cale. I think another question we had is, you know, can you share another sort of client story where this changed the narrative? And maybe I'll take that one, because I was in a meeting not too long ago with one of our client advice folks, Sarah. And our primary niche as a company is business owners selling their companies who want to be generous, usually kind of 10 million plus. And so anyway, we had a husband and wife. We tried to get them, you know, as you can imagine, I'm sure as most people on this call, in the room at the same time. And, you know, the husband, we went through this wealth languages. We actually had a client seminar on it, and they started talking in the seminar, and they actually said, hey, can you guys meet right afterwards? And we literally went downstairs after the seminar, and they said, we want to just sort of share with you what's going on. And what happened was they sort of identified, we had kind of given them the language that the husband was all about opportunity in the business. They were both working in the business. She was the CFO, and he really was the CEO. And so he was always looking for the next deal, the next thing to sell, all of that. And he really wasn't worried about stability or the future. And she wanted stability and some money in the bank. And frankly, the business was really a struggle for their marriage, this miscommunication, and she really wanted to sell the company. And so it actually led to this place. I mean, they were both crying. I mean, it was an amazing thing to witness God kind of using this tool to open up communication where they could really understand where each other were coming from. And it's led to actually that they've agreed to sell the company, honestly, for the sake of their marriage. But they were just stuck in their ability to communicate and get on the same page. So he started understanding better her need for stability and some savings for the future. And she's also given him the opportunity to relax and think about what the next business might be that they should get in that's less time consuming and stressful. And so anyway, God willing, it's leading to a much better communication for them, and I think a much better marriage. So that was really a really cool God thing we saw out of this. So yeah, I just wanted to share that.
I've got a few more questions coming through, and but I'll add to that real quick. I maybe think of another client story. One of our clients, so guy does real estate, makes zukus of money, and they've never done a financial plan, which I don't know if it's just our experience, but I feel like a lot of real estate guys haven't done financial plans. and didn't feel like they needed one, right? Like they had way more money than they needed, so it just wasn't that big of a deal to them. But got them in the planning process and walked them through the wealth languages. And I thought it went great. Like, they were definitely engaged, had good conversations, but left like, didn't think a whole lot of it. I kind of, like, I remember telling Sarah as well, like, I hope that went well. I hope that added value. And the husband called me about like 30 minutes later after we walked him through the wealth languages. They left the office and goes, dude, my wife, I just want you to know, on the way back to the cars, my wife goes, that's the best conversation we've had about money since we've been married. So he was like, I don't care. Like, you got my business, and that was just another example, I think, of how this just solidifies relational capital with clients. Another question that came through is, I think this is a good one. Does this impact other relationships? And I would say absolutely. So obviously the most easy way to utilize this is specifically husbands and wives, but we've had people use this, take it and use. We serve a lot of business owners, that Jeff alluded to, with their executive team, because they have different ways that they view money as it pertains to the business, and it's helpful for them to understand the motivation behind each player on the team, and that can impact, and how it can impact the way that they're communicating as it pertains to the company budget. So absolutely can help other relationships. Also kids, that's another one we've been asked about before. Hey, should I have this conversation with my kids? And I would say absolutely, probably when it's age appropriate, when they're a little older, but certainly to understand how your kids are wired and why they're wired. Getting to ask those questions about why they're wired that way is really a fantastic exercise. Another question that just came through is wealth languages best for couples versus individuals? Good question. I think it's great for both, right? Like, who's the famous philosopher, Greek philosopher, know thyself, right? I mean, it's important for us to know ourselves, and certainly just having the language about why we're wired the way we're wired, and also knowing our gaps. Like, this helped literally solidify for me. I think I knew it intuitively, but just putting language to it was helpful to go, like, one of my gaps is in our personal finances is just stability. It's not what I'm constantly thinking about. I tend to like, oh, no, like, we'll take care of it. It's not a big deal. Let me focus on this other thing over here, because I'm opportunity, and that's the least important to me. So certainly impactful as individuals, but obviously we have found great success utilizing this in conversation with couples, particularly as it pertains to the planning process, because this it impacts goals and objective. It also impacts the estate planning process, the design around why they're wired, why someone might want to give here versus give there as part of their legacy plan. And that communication, particularly if you're having like a family meeting and there's going to be wealth transfer that flows across generations, understanding how people are wired is an important tool in making sure that all flows properly, and you address each person individually and uniquely. So it all comes back to just knowing people at a deeper, more intimate level, I would say. So great question.
Hey, Cale, it's 12:59.
Okay.
Let me go ahead and just wrap it up. I just want to, I'm going to give Cale the golf clap. Thank you, Cale, for being with us today and sharing this. I really think it's a God-inspired tool that's been really helpful for us building relationships with our clients and helping their communication within their marriage. Because if, again, we're going to help families thrive across generations, we got to improve communication. That's the number one risk to their wealth. So, Cale, thanks a lot for sharing with us. Once again, you see our emails on the screen. Please take the survey. We'd love to hear from you what other topics you'd like us to discuss. And then we'd like to get better at this. So let us have it. We can take it about how we can do things technically better, run this call better, webinar. And then we hope that the recording and the tools are a blessing to you, and that it helps you connect more closely with your clients and prospects. And so with that, we thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at the next event.
All right. Take care, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everybody.